and it's my very great pleasure to be able to moderate this next session. And we're going to talk about wallets. We're going to keep talking about wallets because everyone in the world right now are talking about wallets. And off the back of that fantastic presentation from Lockie this morning, we're going to extend the conversation. And it is also my pleasure to introduce Ronny, who was able to give some comments at the in the last session. He's going to start with a short presentation, an update on some of the work that he's involved with. He's here today in his role as the seconded national expert, DG Connect H4 European Commission. I hope I got that right. So Ronny is going to take us through some of the work that he's doing, and then I'll be able to invite Peter and Koen up to the stage. And we have many more questions than 45 minutes will allow, so we could be here for days with the number of questions to discuss. And we'd also love to take some questions from the audience. But first of all, over to you, Ronny, and we'll join you in about 10 minutes.
Thank you very much. So I'll try to do a recap of the current EIDAS revision and the proposed changes to that one, and try to highlight some of the most important part of it. So that's going to be a big picture. So I'll skip lightly some parts and go more into details in other parts. So this framework consists of two parts. This is the electronic identity part and the trust services part. So the identity part is the prerogative of the member states. So the state is the root of trust when it comes to identity. And they govern that themselves, while the trust services are commercialized, meaning it works cross-border, and any trust service can provide services in another member state and basically passport their approval from one state to another. Trust services covers a lot of things. It covers signatures, seals, timestamp, electronic delivery, certificates, and also archiving. And there's going to be at least one major extension of this in regulation. So why is this important? Well, we've all been talking about the importance of electronic identities, but also trusting something that goes beyond identity is also important. I'll come back to that a little bit later on. Some of you may know the term digital verification, not only digital identities. So I'll try to elaborate on that a little bit later on. Another question is, why is the Commission concerned about this? So why should we? This could be solved by the member states, right? Well, except for one thing, and that is the aspect of the internal market. So we want to have a single digital market in Europe for services. And that doesn't work unless there are harmonization among the member states on these aspects. So that's one of the key things that makes the Commission interested in this. So this regulation has a lot to do with the shortcomings of the current regulation. The biggest problem with the regulation we have at the moment is on the cross-border aspect. So all of you, or at least some of you, at least come from states where we have all of these nice electronic systems. But once you go into another country, for instance Germany or France, it's useless. You can't use it for anything. So the cross-border aspect is important there. And with no cross-border, there will be no internal market, so that's a key observation to have here. Also, a lot of states do not have domestic solutions for this. So this is a little bit also to nudge those states to actually provide these services for their citizens. So what is the big thing that we're doing at the moment? Well, as I said, harmonization is a key thing. So if you consider, like I said earlier on, your bank card, you can go to Germany, you could pay with your card in the shops, you can use it at the ATMs. You can even do that, or used to be able to do that in Russia. And this is basically, in a very simplified way, the model we are looking for. it is like an electronic identity is an electronic identity is an electronic identity, and somebody who accepts an identity is an acceptor, is an acceptor, is an acceptor. It doesn't matter where this acceptor is located, and it doesn't matter where this electronic identity comes from. If it's a French, a German, a Dutch, shouldn't make any difference. So that's the harmonization part. And there's going to be obliged issuance of these electronic identities, basically meaning that any resident or citizens that wants this, and I stress want this, should get one for free from the state. So there's no requirement that he needs to have a bank account or have a telecom provider or any association with anything. The states are obliged to provide this free of charge, period. Very important for inclusion. There's also provisions on obliged acceptance. So to accept this electronic identity will be obliged to the member states for public services, but also a broad range of private services. Like sometimes I say basically anybody you can think of will be obliged to accept this. That's the easy way, and there are some exceptions. But online banking, online mortgages, energy, insurance, yeah, everybody will have to accept this. They can, of course, have other methods of identifying their customers, but they will have to accept this also. And this is all about, of course, building momentum. The last important thing here is, as I said, this move into digital verification. So sometimes I compare this with payments. So who want to pay? Nobody wants to pay. They want to have the services or the goods. Same here. Nobody wants to identify. Identify is just a mean to get the services you want. And the verification part goes beyond identity. It goes, for instance, that you are a dog owner, that you live in a certain city, that you have a certain age, that you, for some other reason, are eligible to get services you would not get elsewise. So that's the verification part. Yeah, this is basically a recap of what I did say. So I'll go quickly beyond this one. So one important aspect that I'm not going to delve into here, but is a key aspect, is user control. So this is going to be fully under the user's control, in a sense that he will disclose what he wants to whom he wants to disclose, with some safeguards. So if, for instance, Facebook asks you for your health data for the last 10 years, they will not be eligible to get that kind of information. You could, of course, make a hard copy and mail them, but there will be safeguards on sensitive issues to protect the user. Like my mother, who's past her 80s, if somebody asks her for her biometric data, she wouldn't understand it. She would just give it. So those kind of consumer safeguards will be built into this. So again, this is a little bit recap of what I've said. There's an obliged issuance, that is obliged provision, and there's also obliged acceptance from a lot of parties. And of course, also a big thing, this is going to be free of charge. So a citizen can get this identity for free of charge. So as some of you might be interested in business models, it doesn't mean that it will always be free to use. So that's not covered in this regulation. Naturally, public service will always be free. Most private service will also be free because they have other business models. But there's no rules against having some kind of surcharge when it comes to attestations. For instance, a deed for your property. Nobody's saying that you have to get this for free. This is something you might have to pay for. So there are room for business models here, but this is something we need to work on. So just look at my sheet again. Yeah, obliged acceptance is perhaps the most important thing. Here you will get this slide set after this conference, I think. So I'll just skip fast. So this is important. This is where we go on beyond identity. these attestations of attributes, that's going to be a new trust services, are going to be attestations of other facts about you. So there might be as mundane as your gym membership card or your library card, or it might contain attested information, that is confirmed information, on your tax record, your other funds, like you own large property in Spain. This will then be proof of that somebody attests to, showing that this is correct. And it will be applicable cross-border. So this is very much a framework thing, the concept of having these attested attributes. What can we use those for? I don't know. I have some examples. But this is basically where opportunities lies. Somebody could figure out a smart model to improve business models or availability based on these kind of things, because this is information you don't get today. You can perhaps assess them in some way or get some confirmation within a country. But cross-border, there's no way of getting information from the land registry in Spain. You can get it on paper with a stamp and a apostille and all these kind of things, but electronically, no way. So this is where there's a big room for doing smart things. So data privacy, yes, so use of control, protection, etc., etc. All of these things are key aspects of the wallet. Yes, so how is this being developed? So we have the legal track that are making the law and which are being discussed in Parliament and Council these days. I think you might hear a little bit more about that later in this conference. But in parallel to that, there's a technical process sorry, going on, which you call the toolbox process, which is basically, let's say, from 30,000 feet level, is more like, what is this animal actually going to be? Which standards is it going to be fulfilled? How is the balancing act that always will be there between AML, privacy, anonymity? First, it's this sweet spot being found in terms of technical solution. Not legally, but technical solutions. So that's ongoing at the moment. And the purpose of this is to feed into the reference implementation of the wallet, which is being processed as a tender these days, and also the large-scale pilots that are being applied for these days. So these are the two things I cannot say anything more about, because this has commercial significance beyond this. But they are ongoing. Yes, a lot of background information documents, so I won't go through them. This is something you can look at later on when you get a copy of this slide. So that's basically everything for me.
So Peter and Koen, would you like to come up and join us?
Sure.
I don't know whether or not you're aware, last week the Linux Foundation announced a new initiative called the Open Wallet Foundation. Are you following that? So this discussion today in the context of what's happening in the EU, this is a discussion that's happening globally. And the aim of that foundation is obviously to try and achieve some global interoperability, and also to try and keep some of the big vendors from dominating. Then if you look at some of the really interesting patents that Apple and Google have been filing over the last few years, the idea of identity-linked attributes and orchestrating everything as part of our daily life is very much obvious, I would say, from a patent point of view. So then we have, what is this tension going to be between something that is given to you from a government perspective within the context of EU versus something that's in my pocket where I already have a strong relationship? And often when I think of the word wallet, first of all, I think of money, and we know that Google and Apple have been very successful in pushing into the payment space and disintermediating a lot of payment players. So in the discussion that we're about to have now, I think it's very important, and again, the excellent presentation that preceded us from Lockie, the idea that we do want some data sovereignty in the EU. How are we going to find this balance when we have a digital generation that grow up in a digital playground where their device is everything to them? How do we find and strike this balance? So it would be lovely, Peter and Koen, for you to do a quick introduction so everybody knows who you are. And then my first question will be to you, Peter.
I'm Peter Hoogendoorn. I'm working for CAPGemini in the identity and access management area for 4 years now, and before that about 15 years in identity and access management in other companies.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Koen Jong. I work at Innovalor Advies. We're an advisory company focusing on digital innovation, mostly for public organizations. And my focus is on digital identity and personal data. And besides my job at Innovalor, I'm also very active in the My Data Global community, where we also work together on realizing a world where we as individuals have more control over our data. And I do that as group leader for the My Data Operator Group, which is definitely what they call in DGA data intermediaries, but I think it should also be the starting point for the European wallet.
Thank you, Koen. Peter, in preparation for today, you had an example or analogy that you took from the manufacturing sector, this idea of the screw. Would you like to maybe share and elaborate on that, yeah?
Yeah, where the screw was the key element in making the Industrial Revolution a success. I think the digital identity wallet is our new screw. We are not debating the screw, but we are debating the standard, the metric standard of the screw that makes it interoperable and to make it in use of everything. And fortunately, I think Europe is the standardization committee recognized in the world. We are very good at creating a standard, and companies want to follow us. So in all kinds of areas. So I think we are good geared towards creating a good digital identity wallet.
Ronny, is that a good link to the toolbox? Is that the idea of being able to specify that screw so that we have this maximum interoperability?
So I think I will go further than interoperability. Harmonization is the word. And again, to take the screw, if you have an M5-35, that screw is the same screw, independent of where it comes from. And that's what we're trying to do here. So anybody can produce a screw, but it has to behave, look, and be equal, independent of where it comes from.
Okay. So, Koen, in your introduction, you talked a little bit about the data intermediary, and what came through Ronny's presentation is data control, data privacy, data protection. So, would you like to talk a little bit about how you imagine maybe this data ecosystem or the data intermediary coming in and around the wallet capability?
Yeah, well, personally, I think this is one of the hardest questions you can ask, because these things, at least as I see it, these things are happening completely separate. But from my perspective as a user, they're completely the same, because they help me, well, in the digital world, to get control over my data, get better use of services, and I think, well, that the European wallet will be a data intermediary service, but it's not definitely the other way around, because they can move around more freely in the private sector.
I think if we go with your screw analogy, Peter, screw is putting some things together. So what else? So we have the identity piece, but what else do we need to consider in this ecosystem apart from this incredibly important component, what are the other considerations?
We need to rethink our data gathering, and we are in the hunter-gatherer stage of the digital era, I think. We should rethink if we need all that data, and where is it for? To my knowledge, I think that we are not extreme enough in being anonymous. Privacy by design is only a beginning. We should start being anonymous at the core. And why do we need all that information? So when I do a transaction and I purchase a good, then I can be fully anonymous. In the shop, I pay with a bill and nobody has any registration of what I did. And electronically, there is lots of things that we need for a transaction to complete. Why? So when I am doing an anonymous transaction and I pay, then the bank bill, bam, comes in. With my name, with my bank account, with a lot of information. Why? I don't get it. So we need to rethink this. And old habits die hard. It's for me as well. But we do need to rethink this. When I go into a hospital, why is my name relevant there? I want all the medical people to examine my body. So my body needs to be unique. And they have to all think about my body and diagnose it and repair it. My name is not relevant, but they do ask all those questions over and over again. Why? That will proven to be very hard to change.
So Koen, does this mean if we extrapolate from what Peter's just said, are we moving to a world where there are no more copies? That we have some kind of source of truth, an ideally verified source of truth. So if I'm in hospital, I may not want them or need them to know my name, but I do want them to know that it is my kidney or it's my, what I want to make sure they've absolutely understood my identity and my physicality in relation to that service. So what does it mean about collecting and copies?
Well, first of all, I would prefer them to know my name because I find it a bit more personal and I like it in a hospital, I guess, to some extent. But coming back to your question, no, I don't think we will get rid of copies because, well, for example, here in the Netherlands, we have quite good governmental registries where we got something which we accept to be the truth because we need something to accept. And I don't believe we're going to a world where everything will be in a wallet. So it would be great if we can get some of the information away from the big techs and get it closer to us so that we can go to Facebook and the next day to LinkedIn and got the same connections. But I think there needs to be a ground truth as well. And I think such things as public registries will always be there for that ground truth.
Ronny, is that the idea of this attribute linking? Is that what we start to do then is radiate out from the identity and have this rich environment of, as you say, lots of services that may be possible?
So these attributes are facts of life that is related to your identity, but it's not part of your identity. So for instance, to elaborate on the last comment here, let's for instance say you have a health journal somewhere. You don't want to put that in a wallet. Because if you lose the wallet, you lose the journal, right? So there has to be a safeguard somewhere. But this has to do with, instead of me authorizing somebody access to my health journal, I can, via a wallet, disclose the information I want to disclose to them. So that's the difference. Instead of, this is a decentralized model in the sense that you don't allow a healthcare provider to basically vacuum my health file. I can provide them with what I think is relevant for what they're doing. Of course, there will be overrides. If I am going into emergency hospitalization, I for sure would like them to have my full health.
So you said one of the magic words there, decentralization. So to blockchain or not to blockchain, that is the question. Peter.
To blockchain or not to blockchain?
Do we have to have a blockchain to make this work?
Very hard question. I'm inclined to say yes, because you don't need to verify the verifier. You don't have a Juvenalis dilemma. The blockchain is always right. So that's something.
But what happens if the blockchain isn't right and it's wrong and we can't correct it?
I doubt if we can't correct it. I think you can.
Okay.
It's just another transaction that corrects what was wrong in the first place.
So you think there has to be a blockchain, there has to be, or does there have to be a blockchain or distributed ledger, or are you making an argument that there needs to be decentralized architecture?
Decentralized architecture is the better word.
Okay.
And the current technical solution that is there is the blockchain. Yeah. It would be a very small part of the total infrastructure that we need, but it will be a vital part.
Okay, sorry, Koen. Yes?
Yeah, so I would say, no, we don't necessarily need blockchain. I made some friends now. But I think this concept of trust, I mean, the whole problem why we have, or why I see the need for blockchain is because we need some way to regulate trust, and I don't believe that something like trust can be kept together by just technology, because if you and I, Alexander, are going to agree that you are Alexander and we can put it on a blockchain, well, we're not going to put your name on the blockchain, of course, but it's completely useless when we go to the bank. The bank will ask for a government-issued ID, and that's the way how we regulate trust, and that's also why I have a stronger belief in the European identity, because this regulates the trust
anchor.
Yeah, that we were looking for in the whole SSI development.
Yeah. So Ronny, your slides highlighted the need for privacy and consent and control. What happens when everything we're doing, so I just put two of my phones over there. This is still buzzing, this is still buzzing. What happens when everything is buzzing for consent all the time?
So yes, this is of course a problem, but one of the reasons why we have safeguards is to safeguard against unwarranted request for consent.
Okay.
So nobody except having a legitimate reason to asking for health information will be able to ask for health information.
Okay. So from blockchain to who pays?
Who pays?
Who pays?
Yeah, Ronny already stated that it should be free of charge for the end user.
But nothing is free. Somebody pays somewhere, sometime.
It kind of contradicts with what we learn the people. If you don't pay for it, you are the product.
Yeah.
So now the awareness is coming to life, and people really rethink, should I not pay for it? So at least then I have something to have a say in it and the use of it. And I think people, when it is becoming it is a chicken and egg problem, but when it is big and it is really advantageous to use it, people would like to pay for it, and why not? I think you can get it in a subscription with your internet provider alongside with it, like you do have a Spotify.
Like from Apple, for instance.
Like from Apple. And I wouldn't object to Apple if they adhere to the standards.
Interesting. Koen?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't. I mean, we can ask the audience who is willing to pay for, a wallet. Well, I'm a bit, I'm a bit disappointed, to be honest. But, if I can quote John Eric from last year, we're the identity nerds, so we get this, right? And I don't think the average user is that far that they're already, they know that there's something about privacy that they want to do something with, but they're not at the point that it's so important that they're going to pay for it yet.
But Ronny, you talked about in the idea of this attribute ecosystem, the possibility of all sorts of new services and business models popping up around, yeah?
Yes. And just to reiterate on free, so it's free of charges to get.
Yeah.
It stops there.
Yeah.
so what happens after that? That's discussions to be had.
Yeah.
And of course, as you said, nothing is for free. Somebody has to.
Exactly. I think.
Yeah. And I can imagine if the service is really good, then you're willing to pay for it. I mean, you're willing to pay for a good service, not for, the basic wallet.
Commodity thing, yeah.
So I think that's maybe a nice segue into hearing your questions from the audience. And I think we have a roaming mic so that people can hear us make sure they can hear on the recording. Yeah. Or
I'll just
you'll be our second MC now. Yes.
Thank you. Just to elaborate a little bit more on the payments and who will pay for it, who will benefit most by using an identity wallet? Would it be the holder or would it be the verifier?
So I think that's a mixed picture. So let's say if this facilitates for you to get a very cheap loan on your house from Greece, you are obviously going to benefit from that. Yes, but also the bank in Greece are also going to have a benefit because they're able to offer services to people from Netherlands and Belgium, etc. So it's not exclusive.
It's not exclusive now, but I think mostly the verifier will benefit. If you look at the Know Your Customer process, for example, in the financial sector, the Financial Dagblad and the financial newspaper in the Netherlands figured out that it costs 40 billion euro yearly in the Netherlands alone, facilitating all the KYC processes. If you do that with verifiable credentials, you could diminish those costs enormously. I think banks will be able to pay for those for that function, wouldn't they?
Actually, they already did that using the blockchain. But okay.
Yeah. I think, by the way, for the user itself, if we want the European wallet to be really valuable, I know in the Netherlands we're we want to keep the digital identity close to the public sector, so we need to get away from that, because if it's going to be another DigiD that you only use when doing your taxes, or a major live event like buying a house, then well, it's this app that you use once a year, and it's going to be way more valuable if I can also use it when I check in at the hotel this evening, and I only need to provide the minimal data that they need, rather than my whole copy of my passport, including my unique identifier.
It's interesting with this question, we heard the word verifiable credentials, and if we think of that in the context of W3C, we know that there is a standard, and it actually means something. Sometimes when people talk about verified credentials, they just mean, I can rely on it. So Ronny, when you think of this strong, reliable identity, we may not be using the word verified credential in the W3C standard perspective, but obviously it's designed for you to be able to trust it. Again, if we think about the earlier presentation and data scraping that's happening now, that data is being acquired, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's verified or accurate or in context. So is this the opportunity potentially, Peter, in the ecosystem? So first of all, it's not just the availability of the data, but it's where it came from, who you can trust, and that it's verified? And
it is verified, yeah. And, well, we already talked about, do you need copies? Yeah, I think without copies we can't do it. But you could argue that you are the owner of your data, so you should be the owner of the original. So if you have a diploma from a university, they don't have a database anymore. The database is a part of your wallet where they store it. You can't overwrite it, but you can use it. You can give read rights to companies or institutions you want to share it with.
And when you lose it and leave it in the back of a taxi?
Yeah.
Or drop it in the river? Who helps? Who do you go to? Do you go to the government? Do you go to your bank? Do you go to the university? Who helps?
It should be a kind of a decentralized system where you can recover the information, but it should not be a complete copy. It should be a distributed copy that you can reassemble.
Okay.
And then I still think this is more, you talk about being the owner. I don't think it's about being the owner of data. I think it's about having control over your data. And well, sometime back in Helsinki we had a nice discussion. See Marie-José already pointing.
Do we have a question?
Yeah.
Do you want to?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, when do you really have control? You only have control over your data, whether you own it or it's really about having control. And you only have control over your data if you have control over the original. So we should get rid of copies and have control over your original of your data. And of course, it needs to be verifiable. But yeah, if it's under your in your vault, in your wallet, the original, then you're able to disclose it. So you don't give copies away, you give an insight to your original, and you can revoke the access to that original. Then you really have the control over your data.
And I think also, in my opinion, then data ownership also means the right to change the data, and for some data that is just not true. So then you can still have control over your data without like formal ownership. Yeah.
Of course, those organizations issuing data of you, they have the right to make changes if that's applicable. If you're a doctor and you're registered in the big register here in the Netherlands, and you've made some mistakes and that you're kicked out of the register, of course that register is able to revoke that credential that you're a doctor. And so that's not your control. But once you see in your vault that the information about you is wrong, then you know immediately to what organization to turn to make the necessary adjustments.
So maybe this idea of right to adjusting context. Do we have one more question from the audience, and then we're going to do a wrap up of the panel? So one, yes.
Oh, yeah.
It would be great, Esther.
First off,
if you have a question for
I have
yes?
I have a question, but first off, I'd love for you to continue discussions about ownership and who pays for what in the unconference.
Okay.
So please put them up on the boards because they're really necessary. The question I have is, okay, so there's this brave new future with this driver European wallet coming, and we all have great hopes for it. But in your opinion, because the regulation isn't finalized yet, developments are ongoing, it's all very conceptual, what's the biggest mistake that the European Committee could make to completely screw this up? What would be the worst outcome?
Ronny, are you authorized to answer some question?
Probably not, but I can answer on a general level, and that is the biggest mistake you can ever make is to try to achieve perfection, because every time everything is a balancing act.
Yeah.
If you have this perfect world here, you will have something you can't use. If you have this perfect place over here, you have something where everything regarding privacy is lost. So doing this balancing and finding a sweet spot is important. If you don't do that, well, you're doing something wrong.
Yeah. Esther, that's a lovely segue into the last question that I would like to ask of each of the panelists, and that is, and Ronny, I think you've answered it a little in terms of, what's the most important thing we need to do? And I think you're saying get started. And what are some of the things that we need to be mindful of in getting started? Yeah, because as you say, this is an evolutionary process. So what do we need to get right? And what do we need to be mindful of as we set out to introduce this new layer for us, certainly for many of us, but for those of us that have children or grandchildren, this will just be life. Yeah, this won't be introducing a new concept. It'll just be the way that life works. So what do we need to be mindful of?
Well, as I said, trying to be too perfect, it's like designing an aeroplane. If you have this perfectly safe aeroplane, it will never take off because you have just too much stuff in it, right? So everything is a balancing of and finding the correct balance between different concerns. Like you're talking about anonymity while paying. Yeah, I can buy a loaf in the store these days with my cash notes. I can't buy a car. Why can't I buy a car? Because this has to do with not to combating crime, to combating terror financing, to combating the black economy. That's a perfect example of a balancing act. You can be anonymous for small amounts, large amount, no way. So you have to do these kind of assessment and find these trade-offs.
Get started and balancing act.
Yes.
Yeah, Peter.
The biggest mistake is probably also to have a unique identifier.
Yeah.
Because that will,
Yeah.
that will really make.
Yeah.
That would be a mistake.
Yeah.
But that also is a balancing act, because you don't want criminals to be totally anonymous, and it cannot be prosecuted. So that's also something that we need to take into account of. And getting the roles clear, because we are talking about verifiers and owners, holders. That's all well and good, but I think you really need to dive into those roles and describe them like a mental model that did. It's a really good model, just to really get sharp. What are you supposed to do? What are your limitations? What are your mandates that you can do? So we really think that through and get started doing it, make errors and repair them.
So I hear from you an important design principle around making sure there isn't one single identifier. And then also exploring the roles and the architecture as you start to design those solutions.
Yeah, like a broker function. A broker function has all possibilities to record all transactions that you do. So you can be followed very closely, and that's scary. It doesn't need to be that way. So there are some things that are already underway, like easy. That will try to solve that.
Maybe this one is nice for the afternoon session, Esther, as you're basically the broker, if I can be so bluntly. Yeah. So maybe, yeah.
So for you, Koen, what do we need to be mindful of, and what do we need to, in terms of starting out, what do we need to get right? What do we need to be mindful of?
So I think the first thing that we need to be mindful of is, you said, my generation knows what they are doing. They know how to use an app. They don't know what they're doing with their data. So, I guess that's applicable for all ages. So we need to be really sure that the right mechanisms are in place so that people are aware of what they're actually doing, in particular with personal data that is more vulnerable. So that means that you need a bit of extra resistance probably, rather than the Facebooks, etc., where it's really easy. And it also needs the good mechanisms to make sure that the parties don't ask what they don't need, because sometimes the need for something like a service, like for me, for buying a house or renting a house, that's going to be a huge problem for my generation here in the Netherlands. If they want my credit card and my PIN code, it's also going to be fine, because I really need that house. So we need to be mindful of that.
Okay, so we're out of time. Thank you so much, Ronny, Peter, Koen, for participating and for the questions from the audience. And would you join me in thanking our panel for their contribution today?
Thank you.